Constitutional law expert Professor Pierre De Vos penned an interesting opinion piece this week in the online newspaper, the Daily Maverick. He posed the question, state capture, commissions of inquiry are flawed. Do they hear the whole truth? He joins us now in our Cape Town studios to discuss this. Prof, great to have you. Thanks so much for being with us on the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
All right, so this column was written way before the announcement yesterday of the terms with regard to this Commission of Inquiry. So I need to get your opinion on that quickly. What did you think of the terms? No surprises there?
No, it's actually, it's more or less what one would expect from anybody who's following the Public Protector report and also following the High Court judgment. It has very specific issues that has to be investigated. So it is very specific about what must be investigated, and then there's a catch-all provision that says, but all other corruption in state-owned enterprises involving the members of the executive or anybody else, any other family, can also be investigated if there's evidence of that, of course. So on the one hand, it is focused, on the other hand, it has the open-endedness that allows for the Commission to follow leads when there's evidence of wrongdoing in other matters as well.
Right. However, you wrote and penned, such an interesting opinion piece in the Daily Maverick, where basically you were questioning these commissions of inquiry, saying that they are flawed. Do they hear the whole truth? What is the concern that you have with them?
Well, you know, I'm not saying that commissions cannot do good work, because commissions of inquiry sometimes can uncover some evidence. It can sometimes provide the executive with good advice, but they don't always get to the truth. I'm not saying never, but I think they don't always get to the bottom of the matter, and there are several reasons for this. The first of this is, of course, the terms of reference, but I think they are now covered. Other reasons are that the nature of such a commission of inquiry is often quite legalistic. And so unless you have very good people who are going to investigate the matter on behalf of the commission, you know, get bank records, get phone records, get all those other evidence, it is not so easy to get to the truth if you just have a court-like situation where people come and testify and there's cross-examination. That is not usually the best way of getting to the truth. So unless there's really an active investigation of this, it is not going to be easy to get to the end results. And of course, also we know that sometimes commissions of inquiry, the person who appoints it, the president, can amend those terms of reference. I know from the apartheid era, where the prime minister at the time was the president, actually changed the terms of reference because he didn't like where the commission was going. It was going to uncover all kinds of wrongdoing from his government, and so he wanted to change the terms of reference of the commission because he was worried what would come out.
Yeah, but you also raised quite an interesting point about the judge that's overseeing it, and we do know that it's Justice Raymond Zondo who's doing this, but he is a sitting judge. Usually it's retired judges, and there you find a loophole as well, and you speak about that. What could be the issue there?
Yes, well, I think there are two issues really that could possibly delay the commission if people want to take this up. I hope they don't, but if they want to take it up. The first one is that the Constitutional Court in the Heath judgment, which was about the Special Investigative Unit, said that yes, it is acceptable for a judge, even a sitting judge, to head commissions of inquiry, but it depends on the subject matter. If the subject matter is too controversial, is too political, or if the task that is to be performed by this commission is too investigatory in nature, then that strays perhaps too far away from the task of a judge, and there could be a separation of powers problem, and that could nullify the commission. We know that there was a commission appointed in the Western Cape, and the High Court, maybe going a bit further than the Constitutional Court, actually nullified the appointment of that commission. So that's one argument. And the other argument is, of course, the same argument that President Zuma has raised when he said that he was going to appeal the High Court judgment which dealt with the review of the Public Protector's report. And that is about whether the Public Protector could, in fact, have ordered him to appoint a commission and could have ordered that the Chief Justice nominate the head of that commission, because there's actually Constitutional Court jurisprudence on the matter that says the President must make this decision separately. The High Court said, well, this is a special case, so we don't know what a higher court will say on the matter, but there is that question mark as well.
Yeah. You know, we've seen other commissions in this country before. We've seen the Heifer Commission, we've seen Marikana, the arms deal, just to mention a few. Now, just to take Marikana, for instance, and you yourself also speak about the fact that, yes, so many atrocious things are uncovered during these commissions, and yet it almost as if the commissions happen and then they end. And there isn't really anything tangible to walk away with. And this, I imagine, is the worry with state capture, because this has been a massive blimp on South Africa's radar. And one would hope that there are repercussions and that you actually do see people going to jail and serving time for some of the things that they have done. And yet, do we ever find that happening?
Yes, you see, the problem with the Commission of Inquiry, and I think not everybody understands this, the Commission's findings are not like legally binding findings that must be implemented. Recommendations are just recommendations. It's not like the Public Protector reports. And so what often happens is you get a Commission of Inquiry, they make findings, they make recommendations, and then there's just a document that gathers dust somewhere because there's no political will to implement it. There are two things that will really determine whether this will be a similar case. The one is whether the criminal justice institutions like the Hawks and the prosecuting authority are actually at the same time or in response to what the Commission finds, are they actually going to pursue people? Because they are the ones who actually have to prosecute people. The Commission cannot find anybody guilty. It is the prosecuting authority that must actually prosecute, of course, with the assistance of the Hawks who must investigate. If that doesn't happen, there will not be criminal accountability. The second question is, what do the political principals do? They can choose, of course, to accept the Commission of Inquiry's finding and implement them, for example, firing a minister. But that is a political decision. So we will have to wait and see if anybody is going to be found to be guilty of wrongdoing, whether those in charge, the president at the time, whether the president will act on that or not. Sometimes people act. Very often there is appearance of action, but not much action at all.
This commission, however, is almost going into territory that is rather difficult to charter, because, as you yourself say, the commission get findings, they then recommend to the president what they feel should be done, and the president needs to act. How can we possibly see President Jacob Zuma acting on these findings that they may or may not come forward with, where he is directly implicated? How is he going to take action against himself and those that have been, pointed out in this commission alongside him, including his son?
Yes, well, that is a big problem, of course. The big conceptual problem with this commission is that at the moment still, as long as President Zuma is the president of the country, there's a conflict of interest. If any wrongdoing is going to be found by any of the ministers appointed by the president, by his family members or by himself, then there would really be a requirement for him to act against himself or against those people closest to him, and that will be very difficult. So one must, of course, wait and see what happens in the future, whether the president at the time when the commission delivers its findings, whether he's still the president of the country. For the moment, the Commission is supposed to report in 6 months. I think, as the judge also said on Tuesday, it's going to be very difficult for the Commission to meet that deadline. It might be extended. There's a possibility of that. So by the time that the Commission comes with its recommendations, it might very well be another president sitting in the Union building.
Just finally, as we wrap this up, you mentioned that some of these commissions and its findings find themselves on a shelf somewhere gathering dust. This is different, though, and we have felt a lot of different things happening this year. I mean, we heard the Deputy President of the country talking about nuclear and this new stance on nuclear suddenly. We're seeing a lot of action being taken and almost like a revival to ensure that the corruption that we've seen in previous years is now done away with. This inquiry is possibly one of the most important ones for South Africa. Do you think this will gather dust, or do you believe that this is that one commission where action will be taken and as soon as it possibly can?
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic that it will have some consequence. And much depends not so much only on the political sphere, whether the president is still the president at the time when the commission makes its findings, but it's also in the criminal justice sphere. It really depends a lot on whether the kind of information uncovered is going to actually be used by the hawks and by the prosecuting authority to actually prosecute people if there is any evidence of wrongdoing. So far, until very recently at least, there has been some suggestions that this is not going to happen, but maybe things are changing there. So if we're going to really have consequences, I think that is where we will stand and fall regarding the success of the Commission and its outcome.
We leave it there. Thank you so much for waking up and sacrificing some of your sleep for us. We know how precious it is to you. And Professor Pierre De Vos talking to us from our Cape Town studios, giving us that legal perspective here on the show about the terms of reference and this commission into the State of Capture report. Of course, Professor is a constitutional law expert from the University of Cape Town.